Volcanic Fissure of snaking is just fun. There's a lot of ways to build this skill, but I decided to build around the one that seemed like it was just going to be the most fun way to play it. I'm scaling massive amounts of rage in order to get speed, attack speed, and damage, as well as some non-conventional defensive layers that makes this build feel pretty cozy, but ultimately this build is designed to zoom. There are definitely better ways to build this if you've got a ton of money. I just built this in a way that I thought was interesting. I'd used some new things that I had never done before, and we'll talk about those. So I'm not necessarily making this video to give you a build guide on exactly the best way to play Volcanic Fissure of snaking, but rather to showcase the skill itself for how much fun it really is. So how does it work? Volcanic Fissure of snaking, you target the ground at an area, it sends a little fissure there that does damage on the way, and then there's a little explosion that also does damage that can also hit the same target, and then it will go off and target another enemy. It's possible to get 3 or 4 overlaps with fissures and the explosions if you line it up correctly. Normally what I do is I try to aim behind the boss to hit them with the fissure, and then it comes back and targets the boss with another fissure and a explosion and gets usually around 3 on single target. So whatever the PoE DPS is, you can multiply that times 3. As far as mapping goes, every time you attack, it sends a fissure out and then it splits off in a different direction and it chases enemies down, and it's very, very satisfying. For things like Ritual, you stand in the middle, you hold right click, and it fills the arena with your explosions and your fissures. Things like Simulacrum, all of those standstill mechanics, you're just going to fill the arena with explosions. And then for mapping, you actually have really, really good off-screen coverage because your fissures will chase things off-screen. So let's dive in and talk about the way that I built this. Maybe you can learn something about the defensive layers that I used or the offensive layers. I don't necessarily recommend building this build exactly as I did, but if you choose to, this is going to be the way to do it. Let's dive in. Okay, here we have level 95 Rage Snack. It's just rage stacking and snaking. We are using 2 one-handed weapons. Let's talk about these first. So these are some of the most ridiculous weapons I've ever seen, and I bought them both for a combined 13 divines. These are tier 1, all the way down, and they are perfectly rolled except for one mod. The fire damage is just 2 points off. I don't know how to craft these. I am not a graveyard master. I actually don't like the graveyard at all, but other people are making these like crazy, and they are not too expensive. If you can't find these, you can definitely make your own version of these. They do not need to be perfect tier 1 across the board, but you can make these in the graveyard and have a pair of your own weapons for yourself. You put the mirror tag on it. But again, this is why I don't necessarily recommend building this as I did, because I bought these. I don't know how many are out there. So we get massive, massive base damage from these 2 weapons. We get 20 rage from each of these. So in total, we get up to 135 rage. We get some rage from our belt. We get some on the tree. We get some from the ascendancy. So getting as much rage as possible, and then we don't actually press Berserk unless we absolutely have to. The idea is to maintain that rage for all the benefits that it gives us and just fly through the map. For something like a Guardian, where you run through the map, you end up at the boss with max rage and you can kill them very quickly. But then when you do the invitations, you have to do a little bit of ramping, and it can get a little bit uncomfortable, but I absolutely use this for invitation farming, but it's really just better at blasting maps. You could do things like Legion, you could do essences, you could really do any map content, and it feels pretty good. So this helmet, why this helmet? Usually the Abyssus is kind of a meme item, and for the most part it is. So this one we grabbed a power charge on just because it was cheap. All of this flat damage is really, really strong for Volcanic Fissure. We're just trying to get as much damage as possible. We are also using Trinity, so all of this extra damage of different types is useful. And then we get to the line 45% increased elemental damage taken. This roll can go between 40 and 50, but that number is actually not that important. The reason why is because we don't take much elemental damage. 75% of the damage that we take as elemental will come in as chaos. We are using Incandescent Heart, which gives 25% of LE damage taken from hits as chaos. And then we have a Glorious Vanity in the name of Zabaqua, which gives us Divine Flesh. This is another 50% of LE taken as chaos. So this is for all damage. The other one was just for hits, but in total you get 75% of LE taken as chaos. So Somebody in chat can do the math for me, but 45% increased elemental damage taken only gets applied to 1/4 of the incoming damage, so it's 1/4 as effective, so maybe around 11% increased elemental damage taken. Not so bad. We also have another source of increased damage taken here on Aspect of Carnage. This is not a build that's designed to be giga tanky, or else I wouldn't take things like this, but I thought it was a really cool way to use the Abyssus and then not have so much of that downside. Our amulet is pretty straightforward. We just got some res on here, some life, and then minus mana cost. We want to get our mana cost pretty low because we are attacking really fast with all of our bonuses up. We also have -7 here on this ring. This ring is basically just getting resistances, and we made it with Shaper so we could have the Mark of the Elder. This is a pretty good ring combo. You don't have to do this, but I haven't used this item in a really long time and I wanted to. The Bear's Girdle belt, pretty straightforward. You get max rage, you get damage per rage, and a little bit of life and flat damage. These gloves, I was just getting as much resist as I could on here. We get more rage generation on the prefix, or excuse me, on the implicit. You don't have to get more rage generation here. It just helps you ramp a little bit faster in boss fights. The boots, we got Enduring Cry CDR. We're trying to make our Enduring Cry go off as often as possible with Call to Arms. That recovery from Enduring Cry really helps against the degen that we get from Rite of Ruin. Rite of Ruin triples the effect of rage. We have 135 rage, so you can do the math on how effective that is for this build. It gives us stun immunity, but it also makes us lose life per rage. So we lose like 13% of our life per second. So having that Enduring Cry going off as well as Leech keeps our health topped off. We also get shock immune from these boots, and alongside of the Storm Shroud, which I have somewhere in this build, that gives us, there it is, that gives us full ailment immunity. So we're taking 75% of our elemental damage as chaos, and then we also have max chaos from Divine Flesh. So what are we doing with this? We are going for 90 max res as chaos. We have, as you can see, we have a little bit of overkill here, but 90 chaos res means that 75% of our LE damage will get treated as 90 res, which ends up being like effective 86% res or something like that. Again, someone else can do that math. So the way that we get there is we get 5% here from Divine Flesh, we get 1 here, and then we have 3 Born of Chaoses in our Cluster Jewels. Born of Chaos is 3 max chaos res, that's 9 total, and then you get 10 from Cult of Chaos and 15 here, so that gets you to 90. I have it in this spot. It's not the most efficient thing, but since I'm coming up for Berserking anyway, this is not too inefficient. You can actually get pretty good stuff on these. I looked for ones that had life, some chaos res, so I end up getting a decent amount of life here. But you have to get one of these to get to 90. Taste of Hate does 2 things for us. It makes us take physical damage as cold, but also gives us Fizz as extra cold because we have big Fizz weapons. Fizz as extra is pretty effective, helps our Trinity along. We use a Bottled Faith for big crit and big damage taken. And then we have some crit, some armor, some move speed, etc. on these other flasks. Talk about the gems real quick. We have a Protector and an Vol Ancestral Warchief. Just for melee stuff, you gotta have them. Blood and Sand gives us more area damage while in Blood stance. I leave it in Sand stance for the most part because more area means more likely to have overlaps, which is probably more effective than the more damage. In the helmet, I have automation connected to my Molten Shell, and then I have Call to Arms connected to my Enduring Cry. So the Molten Shell is going off on cooldown. I have them both off right now because it's super annoying in the hideout. But that's going off on cooldown, and then Enduring Cry is going off on cooldown as well. And the cooldown is actually quite low. So Molten Shell is up about 50% of the time. It's a 3.6 second buff with a 4 second cooldown. And then Enduring Cry has a 5 second cooldown and a 2 second buff. So your Enduring Cry is going off all the time, healing you, giving you additional physical reduction. It's really quite nice. In our offhand here, we have a Leap Slam with faster attacks and Blood Rage for frenzy charges. And then our aura setup is Herald of Ice for just explosions. There's no real reason to have it, but I wanted to fit it in for some shatters. And then we have Hatred and Determination connected to an Enlighten. That gets us down to 36 mana. We attack 1,000,000 times per second, but that's no problem because we have instant mana leech. We'll get into that on the tree. Here in the gloves, we have Assassin's Mark and Mark on Hit, and then a Life Tap and Berserk. I only use Berserk when I absolutely have to, like at the end of the map's over anyway, you might as well use it on the boss, or if I come up against a truly giga monster, because what you really want is to keep your rage all the time. And here in the chest we have multi-strike, pulverize. Pulverize is not the best damage support, but it's a ton of AoE, and again, overlaps are really important. Ruthless is for big hits every third hit, which is going to give us a lot more freezes. We tend to freeze bosses, and it's that Ruthless support that's really giving us the massive hits. We use Trinity and then Inspiration. So let's go into the tree and talk about our Ascendancy real quick. We've got Rite of Ruin, as we talked about, and then Crave the Slaughter you have to take on the way for some max rage. Flawless Savagery is crit, multi, and fizz damage, just nice to have, and then Aspect of Carnage. If you want to be a little tankier, you can drop Aspect of Carnage and go for Blitz, but I would rather have the damage in a build like this where you're just looking to blast maps. I was able to complete tier 17s on this, but it's not a tier 17 farmer. I don't recommend it to farm tier 17s. I was able to kill bosses, do the maps, but I just really don't think that this is the build that you want for something like that. Here we have a Watcher's Eye. I got a pretty good one. It's got block chance and hatred crit. Hatred crit is huge for this build. Really helps us get a lot of damage. I unfortunately never figured out how to get this int node out of here, so I just unfortunately am taking an int node. Dual wielding large clusters are actually really, really strong. You can get something like Martial Momentum, which is accuracy, damage if you've used a travel skill recently, which is pretty much all the time, and then attack speed. This is a huge amount of damage. And then things like Fuel the Fight give you leech for your mana. We also have life leech over here, and they both come with bonuses. Damage while leeching, and we're pretty much always leeching. Attack speed, and then more attack speed and damage while leeching. To go along with that, we take this mastery here, which gives us 10% instant leech. That is leech for our mana and our life, which means that you don't need a big mana pool because of the instant leech. You are filling up instantly. I have another Martial Momentum over here. Little Corrupted Blood Jewel. We have our Storm Shroud that we talked about. Here's a pretty neat spot. The Unnatural Instinct here is absolutely phenomenal. Gives you a bunch of evasion, max life, all res, a bunch of dexterity that you can then tattoo if you want. I did not do that in here, and I should have, but you should definitely be tattooing those. Gives you accuracy, attack speed. There's just a ton of value in taking this here for this build. And then it puts you only a couple of points away from spell suppression here. We are at 51 spell suppress, which means we're at around 75 spell suppress chance with lucky, which is quite nice for a build on this side of the tree. We could turn a ton of this into spell suppression. We could turn these 4 into spell suppression. I should have done that. I just never got around to it. This elemental mastery is super nice. It inverts monster resistance. So for a tri-ele build, this is super strong. We grab this dual wielding mastery over here for blind and maim, because we're hitting with both hands. That's up all the time. We convert the rest of our damage to cold from the cold mastery here. The gem naturally converts 60% to fire, so this caps us off. Along with hatred, it easily keeps our trinity up. So, like I said, I don't necessarily recommend playing this build as is. I had a ton of fun with it. If you watched it on stream and you like the way it looks, definitely give it a try. But this is more to get people to look at Volcanic Fissure of Snaking, which is a super, super fun skill. I have another build video coming in the next couple of days. A much more expensive build than this one. So stay tuned for that. Come check me out on Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0__. If you want to support me, like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. I've got so much more content coming. I hope you guys will check me out over on Twitch. I appreciate each and every single one of you. Thank you all for watching. And as always, take care.